Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome to the Abracast. I'm your host, Dr. John Towers. We're sitting on the bleachers. We're like on the front row. I don't know if the cheerleaders are still going or not. It's in like overtime. We're getting our asses handed to us. So we've been talking an awful lot about the state of Western civilization, what's going down, what's happening around the world. I talk about, this really doesn't, I guess in a way, it doesn't really fit into conspiracy theories. Like, it's not conspiracy, right? Like, you could go right to the websites and look. You can just check it out. Like, apply for a mortgage and figure out what an ESG is. Ask fucking somebody. But at the same time, we used to spend a lot of time talking about the media and, journalism is dead. It's been dead for years. So this is the reason that I don't need alien abductions. This is the reason I don't need secret space programs. This is the reason I don't need hollow earth conspiracy theories. This is why I don't need birds aren't real. Do the research. This is the reason that you really don't need any of that stuff, because there are people who are communicating amongst themselves, people in high positions, not necessarily politicians, but they're not excluded for sure. John Kerry has told us, you are not going to believe how fast this fucking happens. People changing the world around us, and not for our benefit. Whose benefit? They might say it's our benefit. It's for the environment. We're driving gas to be $10 a gallon. If it's for your own good, you'll be happy. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's what they tell you. That's what they tell us. If you're paying attention, it's out there. So on the flip side of that, we have what's going on in Ukraine. Is Vladimir Putin in on it? Is he in on this great reset? And he's helping it along by acting like a lunatic? Or is there something else going on? We've been talking about Alexander Dugin's fourth political theory now here for a couple episodes, and this is going to be the one where we wrap it up. I'm not reading the whole book, but I think that, I explained things are happening fast. We kind of need to take this on board. The parts that I've highlighted and talked about, we need to put it on board and we need to move on, because things are going quick, bro. They're going quick. So we're going to continue with that here. A couple episodes ago, I was talking about how this is sort of like the Cybermen versus the Daleks in the Battle of Canary Wharf back when Doctor Who was worth watching. And it's good. That's good. Neither one of those sides are right. And, it's crazy because the more and more I dissect this, the more and more I'm thinking, like, we're just programmed to be binary. We're just not like that, you leftist lunatics. We're programmed to be, if this thing is bad, it's bad, which means that this thing is good. And looking at Ukraine, looking at Russia, looking at the Great Reset, it's not like that. It's like, the Great Reset is, what did I say? The Great Reset was the Daleks, and the Great Awakening, or this return of imperial traditionalism that Russia and China are sort of displaying, would be the Cybermen. Maybe I said it the other way around. I can't remember. Anyhow, that's good, right? It's good because neither one of them are good. They're both bad. They're both really fucking bad. I had a listener point out that this is like the NWO in the heyday of WCW. You have the red NWO and the black NWO. It's like none of them are any good. And it was an interesting theory because it also the theme of it was the theatrics of professional wrestling. So thank you for that. I really did enjoy reading those interacting with those emails. But back to the binary thing, that if this is bad, then this is good. That's punch a Nazi. When Antifa was going crazy, punch a Nazi. Well, the Antifa was bad too. But we're mixed up. We have this cartoon version of how we interpret these complicated events. We're not recognizing the gray areas, which is how we find ourselves helping the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 80s. Nowadays people just look at it and they're like, well, we were helping Al Qaeda. Well, we were also in a Cold War with fucking the Soviet Union. The board shifts, the pieces change, and we have to recognize it. We have to also understand, when you talk to writers will say, well, like, the best bad guys think that they're the good guys, right? And that's got to be true. No, it's, super cartoonish just to be Skeletor. I'm Skeletor and I'm evil. Bah, 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 He-Man. Like, their motivations have to make sense to them beyond being evil. And I guess that's why we're spending so much time talking about this Alexander Dugin book, The Fourth Political Theory. And I hope, that I hope that during my editorializing, I'm keeping it in context. Like, the reason this book is evil is because some of it sounds really good. He's railing against globalism and the New World Order, and it sounds really good. Well, of course, he's a Cyberman. And then when you go over and you listen to the Great Reset and stuff, and you listen to Bill Gates or Prince Charles or Klaus Schwab talking about it, they think they're doing good for the environment, and they think they're doing good for people, and they think they're doing good for the world. And some of it can sound good if you're inclined to that sort of nonsense, but that's because you're a Cyberman. And they are Cybermen. People caught in the middle that don't know what's going on. So I think this is going to put a perfect sort of exclamation point at the end of this fourth political theory series. And like I said, this is not the whole book. We're not even halfway through the book. I've jumped ahead a little bit, and this we're going to be doing two parts. One is world order from the U.S. point of view, and world order from the non-U.S. point of view, because we're looking at, why these Russians aren't just being evil for the sake of being evil. There's something going on that justifies it to them, and I believe that it's this fight against the Cybermen, right? World order from the I think I have it flipped around. I think the Daleks should be the globalists, and the Cybermen should be. I don't know. I'm not going to spend any more brain power thinking about it. I think that you get my point. World order from the U.S. point of view. It's been my contention during these talks about the Western civilization that we've lost our moral authority. The U.S. are no longer the good guys. We're not the American soldiers that show up and fight the good fight. We're not the cowboys that get the girl and ride off into the sunset after, kicking ass at high noon. We're not the Serpico. I don't know, whatever. We're just not those people anymore. We are bankrupt. And our leadership and government and leaders and elites are totally corrupt and evil to some degree or another. Like the Luciferian baby-eating evil. So in this grand scheme, we're representing this this great reset. We're representing globalists. We're on the side of that. World order from the U.S. point of view. The position of the USA during this shift is absolutely assured, but its long-term future is under question. The U.S. is now undergoing the test of its global imperial rule and has to deal with many challenges. Some of them are quite new and original. This could proceed in 3 different ways. The creation of an American empire, stricto sensu, with a consolidated and technically and socially developed central area or imperial core, with the periphery kept divided and fragmenticized in a state of permanent unrest, near chaos. The neocons, it would seem, are in favor of such a pattern. So whenever you hear neocons, I think of the language that's being used. Neocon is a term created by the Clinton War Room to make conservatives sound like neo-Nazis. Literally, that's where it came from. Creation of multilateral unipolarity, where the USA would cooperate with other friendly powers, Canada, Europe, Australia, Japan, Israel, Arab allies, and perhaps other countries in solving regional problems and putting pressure on rogue states such as Iran, Venezuela, Belarus, or North Korea, or preventing other powers from achieving regional independence and hegemony, China, Russia, etc. It would seem that the Democrats and President Obama are inclined to this vision. I remember Obama was speaking at the UN one time, and he was like, talk about globalism, we are partners around the globe. We're citizens of the globe now. And then Putin got up and he was like, all that shit doesn't make any sense. He was like, none of that makes any sense. It's all gibberish. Promotion of accelerated globalization with the creation of a world government and swift de-sovereignization of nation states in favor of the creation of a United States of the world ruled by global elites on legal terms. For example, the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations project, represented by the strategy of George Soros and his foundations. The colored revolutions are viewed here as the most effective weapon of destabilizing and finally destroying states. The U.S. often seems to be simultaneously promoting all three strategies at the same time as part of a multi-vector foreign policy. These three strategic directions of the USA creates a the global context in international relations, the USA being a key factor on a global scale. Beyond the evident differences of these three images of the future, they have some essential points in common. In case the USA is interested in affirming its strategic, economic, and political domination and strengthening the control or other global actors and weakening them, the gradual or accelerated de-sovereignization of what are now, or more or less, independent states, and the promotion of the supposedly universal values reflecting the values of the Western world, i.e., liberal democracy, parliamentarianism, free markets, human rights, and so on. Therefore, we face a contemporary world in a strong and seemingly permanent geopolitical arrangement where the U.S. is the core and where the rays of its influence, strategic, economical, political, technological, informational, and so on, permeate all the rest of the world depending on the strength of their will to accept or reject it. In the case of different countries, ethnic or religious particulars, it is a kind of global imperial network operating on a planetary scale. I forgot to mention that I have my vessel of the art. It's filled to the brim with the mother's milk. The formula for mass distraction, the Jinn Jihad. This USA-centric global geopolitical arrangement can be described on several different levels. Historically, the USA considers itself to be the logical conclusion and the peak of Western civilization once it was presented in the terms of manifest destiny of the USA, and then the Monroe Doctrine. Now they speak in terms of enforcement of universal human rights norms, promotion of democracy, technology, free market institutions, and so on. But in essence, we simply deal with an updated version and the continuation of Western universalism that has been passed down from the Roman Empire to medieval Christianity, modernity with the Enlightenment and decolonization, and up to the present day postmodernism, the ultra-individualism. History is considered to be unevocal and monotone process of technological and social progress. The path of growing liberalization of individuals from all kinds of collective identities, the tradition and conservatism are thus regarded as obstacles for freedom and should be rejected. The USA is in the vanguard of this historical progress and has the right, obligation, and historical mission to move history further and further. The historical existence of the U.S. coincides with the course of human history. So American means universal. The other cultures have either an American future or no future at all. Politically, there are very important trends in global politics that define transition. The peak of the political thought of modernity was the victory of liberalism, classic liberalism, over the alternative political doctrines of modernity, which was fascism and socialism. Liberalism has gone global and become the only possible political system. It is now progressing further towards a postmodern and post-individual concept of politics, generally described as post-humanism. The USA, again, plays here the key role. The form of politics promoted globally by the USA is liberal democracy. The U.S. supports the globalization of liberalism, thus preparing the next step to political postmodernity, as described in Empire, the famous book by Negri and Hart. There remains some distance between liberal ultra-individualism and properly postmodern posthumanism, promoting cybernetics, genetic modifications, cloning, and the chimeras. With the world's periphery, we still face the universalizing process, the accelerated destruction of any holistic social entities, the fragmentation and atomization of society, including via technology, internet, mobile telephones, social networks, where the principal actor is strictly the individual, divorced from any natural and collective social context. An important testimony to the dual use of democracy promotion has been explicitly described in an article by the American military and political expert Stephen R. Mahn, who affirmed that democracy can work as a self-generating virus, strengthening existence in historically right democratic societies, but destroying and immersing in chaos traditional societies not properly prepared for it. So democracy is thought to be an effective weapon to create chaos and to govern the dissipating world cultures from the core, emulating and installing the democratic codes everywhere. Evidence of this process can be seen in the chaotic aftermath of the heady events of the so-called Arab Spring. After accomplishing the full fragmentation of societies to individualization and atomization, the second phase will begin. The inevitable division and dissolution of the individual human itself via technology and genetic tinkering to create a post-humanity. This post-politics can be seen as the last horizon of political futurism. Ideologically, there is a tendency for the U.S. to increasingly link ideology and politics in their relations with the periphery. Before U.S. foreign policy acted on the basis of pure pragmatic realism, if the regimes were pro-U.S., they were tolerated without regard to their ideological principles. The long-standing U.S.-Saudi Arabia alliance represents the perfect example of this foreign policy realism in practice. Thus, some features of this schizophrenic and dual morality were ideologically accepted. However, it seems that recently the U.S. has begun to try to deepen democracy, supporting popular revolts in Egypt and Tunisia. Whose leaders were trusted allies of the U.S., as well as corrupted dictators. The double standard in the U.S.'s political ideology are slowly vanishing, and the deepening of democracy progresses. The culminant point will be reached in the case of probable unrest in Saudi Arabia. At the moment, the practice of democracy promotion on the ideological basis, including politically difficult and inconvenient circumstances, will be tested. Economically, the U.S. economy is challenged by Chinese growth, energy security and scarcity, crippling debt and a budget deficits, and the critical divergence and disproportion between the financial sector and the zone of real industry. The overgrowth or the bubble of American financial institutions and the delocalization of industry have created a discontinuity between the sphere of money and the sphere of the classic capitalist balance of industry, supply, and consumer demands. This was the main cause of the financial crisis of 2008. The Chinese political economy is trying to reestablish its independence from U.S. global hegemony and may become the main factor of economic competition. Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and some other relatively independent countries control over large reservoirs of the world's remaining natural resources, puts a limit on American economic influence. Someone might want to tell us that. Well, us, I mean, Let's Go Brandon that the economy of the EU and the Japanese economic potential represents two possible poles of economic competition to the U.S. inside the economic and strategic framework of the West. The U.S. attempts to solve these problems using not only purely economic instruments, but also political and at times military power as well. We could thus interpret the invasion and occupation of Iraq, Afghanistan, the interventions overt and covert in Libya, Iran, and Syria from a geo-economic as well as a geopolitical perspective. Promotion of domestic political opposition and insurgents in Russia, Iran, and China are another similar method towards the same goal. But these are the only technical solutions. The main challenge is how to organize the postmodern and finance-centric economy with continued growth, overcoming the widening critical gap between the real economy and the financial sector, whose logic and self-interest becomes more and more autonomous. It has been asserted that the USA is the main and asymmetric actor at the center of the present transition state of world affairs. As Vidrine has noted, this actor is a true hyperpower, and the strong current geopolitical arrangement that included all the levels and network examined above is structured around this American core. The question raised here then is this actor fully conscious of what it does and what it fully understand what it will obtain at the end? That is, which form of international system or world order it is going to achieve. Opinions on this new important point are divided. The neocons proclaiming the American century are optimistic as to the future American empire. But in their case, it is obvious that they have a clear, if not necessarily realistic vision of an American-dominated future. In this case, the world order will be an American imperial order based on unipolar geopolitics. At least theoretically, it has one redeeming point. It, at least, is clear and honest about its goals and intentions. The multilateralists are more cautious and insist on the necessity to invite the other regional powers to share the burden of global hegemony. With the U.S., it is obvious that only societies similar to the USA can be partners, so the success of democracy promotion becomes an essential feature. The multilateralists act not only in the names of the USA, but also in the names of the West, whose values are or must be made universal. Their vision of a future world order dictated by global but U.S.-led democracy is foggier and not as clearly defined as the neocons' American empire. Delete, delete, delete. even hazier is the extreme vision of the global governance envisioned by promoters of accelerated globalism. It might be possible to effectively overthrow the existing order of the sovereign nation states. But in many cases, this will only open the door to more archaic local religious and ethnic forces and conflicts. The vision of a single, open, and by necessity, largely homogeneous society on the scale of the earth is so fantastic and utopian that it is much easier to imagine the total chaos and Hobbes' war of all against all and the state of nature of a world without states. But wait a minute. Oceania has always been at war with Euroasia. Euroasia has always been at war against Oceania. The vision of possible future worlds. That was the name of one of the arcades that I went to when I was a little kid. Future World. It was fun. I was really good at Centipede back then. The vision of possible future world. I just imagine walking into future world. The vision of possible future world orders from a perspective of the U.S. and the West differs among competing factions of American elites, ideologists, and decision makers. The most consequent and well-defined strategy of the neocons' unipolar world order is at the same time more ethnocentric, openly imperialistic, and hegemonic. The other two versions are much more dimly conceived and uncertain. Thus, it is as likely as they could lead to an increase in global disorder. As order, Richard Haas has termed the paradigms of an international system according to these two visions as being characterized by non-polarity. So the transition in question is in any case American-centric by its nature, and the global geopolitical arrangement is structured so that the main global process would be moderated, oriented, directed, and sometimes controlled by the unique hyperpower actor performing its work alone or with the help of its Western allies and regional client states. So apparently this was written when Obama was in power, right? When he was the president. So a lot of shit has changed since then. Like, I would, and it's changed rapidly. Like, I would say that the United States is becoming now a client state for the World Economic Fund. I believe that the United States is a client state for this shadowy global push. We're no longer on the right side of this. And I don't think we're going to be in charge of anything. I just don't see it that way. I always wondered why an American never is like the General Secretary of the UN. You know, it's always Kofi Annan. Yeah, I know him. He's going to need to speak 27 languages when he's selling fake hats. Yeah, you know, it's the same reason why an American's never been the Pope. Like, we got Catholics here, bro. You know, we're just as good at whatever weird stuff that you guys are doing, eating all the dead Jesuses and all this. I was going to say something pretty inappropriate. Yeah, I'm sure there's some American Catholics that, you know, touch little boys just as good as the rest of you guys do. So I think Dugin is giving us a little bit too much credit, you know, and that just might be hindsight being 2020 from this point of view for when this was written. You know, if Obama's the president here, you know, I don't think we're going to be the boss of anything. I think we're going to be the the cattle, the sheeps. All right, so here's the next section, the world order from the non-U.S. point of view. The Americano-centric world perspective described above, despite being the most important and central global tendencies, is not the only one possible. There can be, and there are, alternative visions of the world political architecture that can be taken into consideration. There are secondary and tertiary actors that are inevitable losers in the case of the success of the U.S. strategies, the countries, the states, the peoples, the culture, that would lose all, even their own identity, and gain nothing if the U.S. realized its global aspirations. There are both multiple and heterogeneuses that can be grouped into several different categories. So before I go any further, I also want to say, when I was a younger person in high school listening to civics classes and all this stuff, and I'm looking around and I'm like, we got it pretty good here. So I grew up like at the end of the Cold War, I used to have nightmares of nuclear war. That's just the culture that I grew up in. Every TV show or, the Damnation Alley with George Papard or, everything was couched in this idea of mutually assured destruction. I remember I faked it home from sick one time, and on HBO, there was some documentary. I'm sure it's still out there. I should try to find it. There was some documentary about Nostradamus, and it scared the living shit out of me. Like, it scared me on a level that was so real. I must have spent. Maybe I even talked about. I'm having a little bit of deja vu. I might have talked about this on the show before. Wow, what am I talking about? Oh, right. I used to, and this was like when Ethiopia was, people, there was famines going on in Ethiopia and all this stuff. And I'm like, why don't people just like plagiarize our founding documents and use them in their countries? And it baffled me, as a middle schooler or high schooler or whatever. Like, our shit works just great. Like, why doesn't everybody do that? And it's hilarious because you think about, well, they have these different cultures where that shit just doesn't work out very good. Yeah, and that reminds me of like after the Declaration of Independence was signed, there's reports that Ben Franklin came out and he was reporting to the people that were around the building, and he's like, well, guys, you got a democracy if you can keep it, because there was a lot of people that were like, let's just make George Washington like the king of America. Anyhow, the reason I'm talking about this is because of what the dude just said here. He said, there can be, and there are, alternative visions of the world political architecture that can be taken into consideration. There are secondary, tertiary actors, inevitable losers in the case of the success of the U.S. strategy. Countries, states, peoples, and cultures that would lose all, even their own identity, and gain nothing if the U.S. realized its global aspirations. So that's what really started me on this whole tear that I'm trying to babble my way through right now, because one of the countries that I felt that we were always, similar to was like Australia, right? Like, I remember the Mad Max movies and all that, the leather and the weird chicks and the awesome cars, That's another one of these things where it's just like, what's the reason for the Mad Max movie? Well, there was a fucking nuclear holocaust. That's what it was all about. That's what I grew up with. So, but during COVID, you look at what happened in Australia, you look at what the Australians put up with, and you're like, oh, I don't think they're like us at all. But maybe that's saying something about us, because we got pushed around way more than I thought that we should have taken. I mean, we are just now being able to take our masks off in the fucking grocery store in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh specifically. Can you fucking believe that? All right. Anyhow, that just made me think of this, like the importance and the difference in culture. Some people just can't handle all this awesome freedom. You know what I'm saying? So people just can't handle all this eagle screeching, AR-15 firing, whiskey, guzzling fucking freedom. The first category is composed by the more or less successful nation states that are not happy to lose their independence to a supranational exterior authority. Not in the form of an open American hegemony, nor in the Western-centric forms of world government or governance, nor in the chaotic dissolution of the failed international systems. There are many such countries. Foremost among them are China, Russia, Iran, India, but including many South American and Islamic states. They don't like the transition at all. I got news for you, bro. I don't like this transition at all either. Suspecting with good reason the inevitable loss of their sovereignty. Ditto. So they are inclined to resist the main trends of the global American-centric geopolitical arrangement or adapt it to such a manner that it would be possible to avoid the logical consequences of its success, be it via an imperialist or globalist strategy. The will to preservation of sovereignty represents the natural contradiction and the point of resistance in the fate of the American/Western hegemonic or globalist trends. Generally speaking, these states lack an alternative vision of the future international system or the world order, and certainly do not have a unified or common such vision. What they all want and share in common is a desire to preserve the international status quo as enshrined in the U.S. Charter, and thus their own sovereignty and identity as nation states in the present form, adjusting and modernizing them as an internal and sovereign process as necessary. Among this group of nation-states seeking to preserve their sovereignty in the face of the U.S./Western hegemonic globalist strategies are 1. Bing! Those states who try to adapt their societies to Western standards and to keep friendly relations with the U.S. and the West, but to avoid direct and total de-sovereignization, including India, Turkey, Brazil, up to, in certain point, Russia and Kazakhstan. 2. Bing! Those states who are ready to cooperate with the USA, but under the condition of a non-interference in their domestic affairs, such as Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. 3. Bing! Those states who, while cooperating with the USA, strictly observe the particularity of their society by permanent filtration of what is compatible in Western culture with their domestic culture, and what is not, and at the same time trying to use the dividends received by the cooperation to strengthen their national independence, such as China, and at times China, and at times Russia. 4. Bing! Those states who try to oppose the USA directly rejecting Western values, unipolarity, and U.S. Western hegemony, including Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea. However, all of these groups lack an alternative global strategy that could be systematically comparable with the American visions of the future, even if without consensus or a clearly defined goal. All these states generally act individually on the world state in their own direct interest. The difference in foreign policy among them consists only in the amount of radicalism and their rejection of Americanization. Their position can be defined as reactive. This strategy of reactive opposition, varying from rejection to adaptation, is sometimes effective, sometimes not. In some, it doesn't give any kind of fucking alternative future vision. Instead, the future of the world order or international system is considered as eternal conservation of the status quo, i.e. modernity, nation states, the Westphalia system of state sovereignty, and strict interpretations of the preservations of the existing UN Charter and the UN configuration. The second category of actors who reject transition consists of subnational groups, moments, and organizations that oppose the American dominance of the structure of the global geopolitical arrangement for ideological, religious, and or cultural reasons. These groups are quite different from one another and vary from state to state. Most such are based on the basis of an interpretation of a religious faith comparable with the secular doctrine of Americanization, Westernization, and globalization. But they can also be motivated by ethnic or ideological, for example, socialist or communist considerations or doctrines. Others may even act on regionalist grounds. The paradox is that the process of globalization, which aims to universalize and make uniform all particularities and collective identities on the basis of purely individual identity, such subnational actors easily become transitional. The same religions and ideologies often bring present in different nations across state borders. Thus, among these nation-state actors, we could potentially find some alternative vision of the future world. The future world. Orders or international system can stand opposed to the American Western-led transition and its structures. We can roughly summarize the different ideas of some of the more important subnational, transnational groups as follows. The most recognized is the Islamic world vision, which represents the utopia of an Islamic world state or the global caliphate. This project is as opposed to the American-led transitional architecture as it is to the existing status quo of modern nation-states. Osama bin Laden remains symbolic and archetypical of such ideas in the attacks which brought down the towers of the World Trade Center in New York on 9/11, and which are supposed to have changed the world, are proof of the importance of such networks and the seriousness in which they should be taken. Another such project can be defined as the transnational neo-socialist plan represented by the South American left and personally by Hugo Chavez. This is roughly a new addition to the Marxist critic of capitalism, strengthened by national emotion in some cases such as Zapata's and Bolivia, the ethnic sentiments or green ecological critiques. Some Arab regimes, such as until recently the Libyan Arab Jimahara under Muammar Gaddafi, can be considered to be in the same vein. The vision of the future world order here is presented as a global socialist revolution preceded by anti-U.S. liberation campaigns in every country across the globe. The U.S. Western-led transition is envisioned to be, by this group, the large incarnation of the classic imperialism criticized by Lenin. A third such example can be found by the Eurasianist project, proposing an alternative model of the world order based on the paradigm of civilizations and great powers. It proposes the creation of different transnational political, strategic, and economic entities united regionally by the community of common civilizational areas and shared values, in some cases religious and others secular and or cultural. They should consist of states integrated on regionalist lines and represents the poles of the multipolar world. The European Union is one such example. The nascent Eurasian Union proposed by Russia's Vladimir Putin and Kazakhstan's President Borat. Another, and Islamic Union and South American Bolivarian Union, a Chinese Union, an Indian Union, a Pan-Pacific Union, and other possibilities. The North American Great Space covering today's NAFTA would be regarded as one among several more or less equal poles. Nothing more. This is not all-inclusive, and this is not an all-inclusive list of such non-state actors or theories with alternate visions of the world order. There are others, but they are of smaller scale and thus beyond the scope of this work. In the present state of the world affairs, there is a serious divide between nation-states and the sub-state or transitional actors and ideological movements operating on different levels mentioned above. The nation-states lack vision and ideology, and the movements lack sufficient infrastructure and resources to put their ideas into practice. If in some circumstance it were possible to bridge that gap, taking into consideration the increasing demographic, economic, and strategic weight of the non-Western world or the rest, an alternative to the American Western-led transition could obtain realistic shape and be regarded seriously as a consequent and theoretically founded alternate paradigm of the world order. So the idea of these 3 episodes talk about Dugin's evil little book, the 4th political theory, was to look at the other side. Look at the Daleks or the Cybermen. I still can't. To look at the Cybermen and think, what the fuck are they thinking? What is he doing? Get a little bit of perspective into their worldview. And I hope that I've done that without being too depressing or telling too many pedophile jokes. Anyhow, I'm John Towers. This has been the Abracast. And remember, Kofi Annan's going to need to know how to speak all those languages. When he's in Times Square selling those fake hats.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books. Take control of your destiny. Understand your past. Put your present in context and know your future with a twist. Check out the Abracast Tarot Card Deck. Your body is your temple. So let's make sure you got a badass t-shirt on it. Variety of cool occult themed t-shirts. And other merch like stickers, wall art, mugs, and more. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes. More bonus audio. Additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at Abracast.com.